I am Arthur, 32 years old. For 15 long years, my own family treated me like the ultimate failure, entirely unaware that I had secretly built a $1.5 billion tech empire. While I was wearing a frayed coat, working out of a dusty antique watch repair shop, my parents looked right through me. I remember standing in their pristine living room, clutching a cheap gift, when my mother looked at her friends and said, "Arthur is our little charity case. He just doesn't have the drive to be anything more." They laughed at me in front of 24 people, clinking their crystal glasses to toast my older brother's massive new salary. But there was one thing they didn't know. The mysterious billionaire founder of Nexus Horizon, the very company my brother was begging to partner with, was standing right in front of them. And now, the same people who threw job applications for fast food restaurants in my face are the ones sobbing, facing a massive lawsuit and begging for a second chance. Before I tell you exactly how I tore their perfect illusion apart piece by piece, hit that like button if you believe that true justice always finds a way. And do me a favor, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let's go back to the night the match was struck. The wind was absolutely brutal that Christmas Eve. It whipped through the thin fabric of the thrift store coat I had deliberately chosen from the very back of my closet. The cuffs were terribly frayed, the second button from the top was missing entirely, and the wool smelled faintly of mothballs and damp basements. It was the absolute perfect costume for the role I was expected to play. I stood on the sprawling front porch of the house I grew up in, a massive colonial estate situated in an exclusive gated neighborhood with strict HOA rules that practically mandated perfectly manicured lawns, even in the dead of winter. Through the grand, frosted bay windows, a warm, golden yellow light spilled out onto the freshly shoveled snow. Even from the porch, I could hear the faint, sophisticated hum of jazz music, the sharp clinking of expensive wine glasses, and the high-pitched, practiced laughter of people who absolutely loved the sound of their own voices. Right in the dead center of the massive living room, hanging proudly above the floor-to-ceiling stone fireplace, was an enormous custom banner. It read, "Congratulations, Julian, our CEO." My older brother's latest triumph was plastered up there like a royal family crest. Let me be perfectly clear about something. They hadn't invited me tonight out of love. They hadn't invited me out of some warm, fuzzy holiday spirit of family reunion. They invited me so I could serve as the dark, pathetic background canvas required to make Julian's blinding light shine even brighter. They desperately wanted me to witness my own supposed failure reflected directly in his overwhelming, undeniable success. I turned the heavy brass doorknob and stepped inside. The house immediately smelled of rich cinnamon, slow-roasted prime rib, and old money. The ambient conversation in the grand foyer literally paused for a split second when I walked through the door. My mother, Eleanor, immediately stepped forward. She was wearing an emerald green silk dress that likely cost more than a used car, and a heavy string of authentic pearls rested perfectly against her collarbone. Her sharp, calculating eyes swept over my worn leather boots and my cheap, frayed coat like a barcode scanner registering a highly defective product. "Well, you made it," she said, her voice dripping with a forced, icy politeness. She didn't offer a hug. She didn't even step fully into my personal space. "Everyone's already in the main living room. Try your absolute hardest not to track dirty snow onto the Persian rugs, Arthur. We just paid a fortune to have them professionally cleaned yesterday." I stepped completely inside, gently closing the heavy solid oak door behind me. The immense warmth of the house washed over my freezing skin, but the atmosphere didn't feel like home. Not even close. It felt like walking into a high-end museum where I was explicitly forbidden to touch the exhibits. My father, Charles, was lounging comfortably in his favorite imported leather armchair near the roaring fire, a heavy crystal glass of single malt scotch resting in his right hand. He glanced up, his eyes barely registering my physical presence before flicking back to the television screen showing the evening financial news. "Arthur, we figured your beat-up jalopy finally broke down on the highway, or maybe you got held up fixing the gears on someone's dusty grandfather clock. He's still wasting his time at that dingy little shop down in the historic district," my mother added quickly, stepping closer to a couple of wealthy neighbors standing nearby, as if she needed to immediately clarify my low social standing to avoid any communal embarrassment. One of the neighbors, a woman dripping in diamonds, gave me a sickeningly sweet, pitying smile and murmured something totally insincere about how honest manual labor builds character. I forced a tight, polite, entirely empty smile. Let them believe exactly what they wish to believe. Tonight, I wasn't here to argue my worth. Tonight, I was quietly gathering data. And then Julian made his grand entrance. He descended the grand curving staircase exactly like a slick politician stepping up to a debate podium. He was wearing a custom-tailored, midnight blue Italian suit that easily cost 3 months of an average person's hard-earned salary. His hair was perfectly styled, not a single strand out of place, and his smile was bright, perfectly white, and highly predatory. The entire room naturally gravitated toward him as if he had his own gravitational pull. He had just officially been crowned the Chief Executive Officer of Rivian Dynamics, boasting a $600,000 base salary, not even factoring in the massive performance bonuses and lucrative stock options. When he finally spotted me standing near the coat rack, his brilliant smile shifted into something incredibly patronizing. He walked over, confidently clapping a heavy, condescending hand on my shoulder. "Arthur, glad you could finally pull yourself away from the magnifying glasses and tiny tweezers to join the real world for a night. I wouldn't miss celebrating your big promotion," I said smoothly, my voice giving absolutely nothing away. He laughed, a booming, arrogant, space-filling sound. "It's all about setting real, actionable goals, little brother. Hard work always pays off." He turned away from me, effortlessly commanding the attention of the surrounding crowd, raising his glass high into the air. "Speaking of hard work paying off, Chloe and I just put the final deposit down this morning on a brand new Porsche 911 Turbo S. Custom white leather interior. It's going to look absolutely incredible parked in the reserved CEO spot outside the new executive offices." A loud chorus of enthusiastic congratulations erupted around the room. My Aunt Beatrice, tightly clutching a half-empty martini glass, leaned over to my cousin and whispered loudly enough for half the room to clearly hear, "It's a crying shame, really. Julian is buying a Porsche outright, and Arthur is 32 years old and still doesn't have a reliable vehicle or a decent retirement fund. It's downright embarrassing for Charles and Eleanor to even explain him to people." I simply took a slow, measured sip of my ice water. Let them talk. Let them build their arrogant pedestals higher and higher into the sky. The higher they climbed, the harder the inevitable fall was going to be. Julian proudly tapped his glass with a silver spoon to silence the room. "Listen up, everyone. Tomorrow is the big day. The biggest day of my career. I am personally meeting with the senior representatives from Nexus Horizon. They specifically requested my firm. If this massive partnership goes through, Rivian's annual revenue literally doubles overnight, and my personal equity stake goes straight through the roof." The room cheered loudly. Nexus Horizon, a $1.5 billion tech giant. They were talking about my company. They were shamelessly bragging about a scheduled meeting with my hand-picked executives. "And get this," Julian added, his eyes wide with feverish excitement. "The billionaire founder of Nexus Horizon is notoriously private. No one in the industry knows who he is. He's a ghost. But his executive assistant contacted us today. The founder himself is going to be sitting at the table tomorrow. He wants to meet in a private location in the historic district. We are going to secure a legacy deal that will set this family up with generational wealth." My mother enthusiastically clapped her hands, looking at Julian as if he were a literal god walking on earth. Then her gaze shifted to me, her eyes hardening. "Arthur, you work down in the historic district. You really should step outside your little clock shop tomorrow afternoon when Julian arrives. Just stand back on the sidewalk and watch how real, high-level business is done. It might actually inspire you to finally do something meaningful with your life." I looked directly at my mother. I looked at Julian, glowing with unearned pride and blinding arrogance. I smiled. It was a genuine, terrifying, cold smile that not a single one of them understood. "I'll be there," I said softly, my voice perfectly calm. "I guarantee it." I couldn't wait to see the sheer horror on their faces when the rusty door of my watch shop swung open to reveal the actual truth. But before the dawn of that absolute reckoning, the night had to get much, much darker. I thought I knew exactly how deeply they despised me. I was wrong. To truly understand the absolute, deep-seated satisfaction of what was about to happen to them, you have to fully understand the toxic soil in which this family's dynamic grew. As the lavish Christmas dinner was finally served, an excessive spread featuring a massive cut of prime rib, truffle-roasted vegetables, and heavily imported French wines, I was directed to sit at the very far end of the extraordinarily long mahogany table, the wobbly chair near the swinging kitchen door, the designated, unspoken spot for the family failure. The lively conversation flowed completely around me, over my head, entirely ignoring my presence. They were intensely focused on discussing commercial real estate investments, aggressive stock portfolios, and Julian's rapidly expanding corporate empire. I kept my eyes fixed on my porcelain plate, mechanically cutting my food, but my mind drifted back 20 long years. I grew up entirely enveloped in the dark shadow of the family's golden child. Julian was athletic, obnoxiously loud, aggressively competitive, and demanded constant attention. I was naturally quiet, highly observant, and infinitely preferred taking apart broken radios in the freezing, unheated garage to playing flag football in the yard. I deeply loved understanding how complex, invisible systems work together. I clearly remember being exactly 12 years old. I had spent 3 grueling months teaching myself advanced basic programming languages on a heavily used, second-hand desktop computer I had bought entirely with my own lawn-mowing money. I drew up a massive, complex blueprint for a revolutionary software concept, meticulously spreading the dozens of papers across the large kitchen island. I was so incredibly proud of what my brain had produced. I waited eagerly for hours for my parents to come home from work so I could show them. When Eleanor finally walked through the front door, she didn't even glance at the intricate codes or the carefully drawn diagrams. She only saw what she perceived as a massive mess. Julian had a standard midterm history exam the next day. "Arthur, what is all this absolute garbage?" she snapped, dropping her designer purse onto the counter. Before I could even formulate a sentence to explain my work, she aggressively swept her arm across the kitchen island, violently knocking my precious blueprints straight into the open trash can. "Julian desperately needs this table to study for his history test. Go play out in the garage. Stop making so much noise and clutter with your useless, childish hobbies." I stood there, frozen, staring at the crumpled papers in the garbage. I slowly looked over at my father, Charles, who was quietly taking off his heavy winter coat in the hallway. He had seen the entire interaction. He simply let out a heavy sigh, looked away from my pleading eyes, and opened the evening newspaper. That was the exact day I learned a permanent, defining lesson. In this house, my very existence was an inconvenience. My dreams, my intellect, and my passions were nothing more than acceptable collateral damage to ensure Julian's unobstructed path to glory. When it finally came time for college, the true depth of their betrayal became undeniable. My parents abruptly cashed out the massive joint college fund they had supposedly been saving for both of us since we were born. Every single penny of that fund went directly to pay for Julian's tuition, housing, and living expenses at a highly prestigious, incredibly expensive private business school. When I asked about my share, they sat me down in the living room. They coldly told me I could take out high-interest student loans and attend the local community college. Because, in my mother's exact words, "Julian has the natural potential to lead men. You're much better suited for quietly following directions in the background. It's simply a better return on our financial investment, Arthur. You have to be realistic." So I left. I packed 2 duffel bags, moved out the day after my high school graduation, and never asked them for a single dime. I moved into a cramped, windowless, roach-infested apartment on the wrong side of the city. I took out massive, suffocating loans to pay for my education. I worked grueling night shifts as a commercial building security guard just to pay for the massive computer servers I needed. While Julian was partying in elite fraternities, attending exclusive networking events, and traveling to Europe on my parents' endless dime, I was sitting in the dark, writing complex code until my fingers literally bled and my vision blurred. I built the foundational architecture for a data encryption platform that was light years ahead of anything currently available on the commercial market. By the time I was 24, I sold my first minor patent for 7 figures. By 26, I officially founded Nexus Horizon. I didn't want the flashy fame. I didn't want my face on the cover of Forbes. I wanted absolute, unshakable control. I wanted to build an impenetrable empire in the shadows, far away from the toxic comparisons and the deeply superficial judgments of the world that had cast me aside. I took a fraction of my wealth and bought a small, failing, entirely unremarkable antique watch repair shop nestled deep in the city's historic district. To the outside world, to my family, and to anyone walking past the dusty windows, I was just Arthur, the quiet, unambitious guy with grease on his fingers spending his life fixing old pocket watches. But the thick brick-back wall of that shop wasn't a wall at all. It was a heavily disguised, military-grade biometric vault door that led directly into a massive, underground technological command center and a private, high-speed glass elevator that shot up to the executive suites of the skyscraper cleverly built directly behind the historic block. I built an absolute fortress, and I kept my toxic family firmly, permanently locked outside the gates. Arthur, the sharp, incredibly annoyed bark of my father's voice violently snapped me back to the present moment in the dining room. The heavy dinner plates had already been cleared away by the hired catering staff. The entire family was staring directly at me, annoyed by my silence. "I asked you a direct question," Charles said, swirling the amber liquid in his scotch glass. "Are you even paying attention to this conversation? How is business down at that depressing little shop? Are you even clearing minimum wage these days? Or are you still struggling to pay your heating bill?" "I get by," I said evenly, keeping my face completely blank. Cousin Leo, sitting across the table, snorted loudly into his linen napkin. "Getting by. That's the official Arthur motto, isn't it?" Meanwhile, Julian is out here aggressively negotiating multi-million-dollar corporate contracts. You know, Arthur, if you just showed a tiny bit of actual ambition, Julian might be kind enough to throw a custodial contract your way. You could sweep the floors at Rivian Dynamics. The entire table erupted in cruel, synchronized laughter. It was a highly practiced cruelty, a blood sport they had perfected over decades of family gatherings. I didn't flinch. I didn't blush. I just sat there and meticulously memorized their laughing faces. Aunt Beatrice leaned heavily across the table, the overpowering scent of her expensive perfume suffocating the air around me. "It's not just about ambition, Leo. It's about being grounded in reality. Arthur is 32 years old. No wife, no real estate portfolio, no 401k, no promising future whatsoever. It's deeply tragic, really. He's a grown man living exactly like a lost teenager." I looked calmly at Beatrice, then shifted my gaze to my mother, who was slowly nodding in solemn agreement, wearing a highly practiced mask of fake maternal concern. They desperately needed me to be infinitesimally small so their highly artificial, deeply fragile brightness could feel vast and important. If they truly believed I had absolutely nothing, they didn't have to look in the mirror and ask themselves why they had given me nothing. "Don't worry," Julian said smoothly, stepping flawlessly into his favorite role as the benevolent king of the family. "We're actually going to help Arthur tonight. That's exactly why we asked everyone to stay in the living room after dessert." My mother enthusiastically clapped her hands, standing up quickly from the head of the table. I walked over and sat down. The worn fabric of my thrift store coat rustled loudly in the suddenly quiet room. I looked methodically at the tight ring of expectant, superior faces surrounding me. This wasn't a festive family gathering. This was a highly coordinated ambush, and the storm they thought they were controlling was just beginning to brew into a hurricane. "We love you, Arthur," Eleanor began, taking a dramatic step forward. That specific phrase, whenever it fell from her lips, was always the safety pin being slowly pulled from a live grenade. And because we love you so much, we can no longer simply sit back and watch you completely waste your entire life. She reached purposefully behind the nearest sofa and pulled out a heavy, thick manila folder. She walked over with measured steps and dropped it unceremoniously, heavily onto my lap. "Open it," Julian commanded from his position by the grand fireplace. He stood with his arms firmly crossed over his expensive chest, literally and figuratively looking down his nose at me. I slowly flipped the heavy folder open. Inside was a thick stack of freshly printed papers. The very first page was a rudimentary budget worksheet boldly titled "Taking Control of Your Debt for Beginners." The next few pages were actual printed job applications she had downloaded from the internet. A shift supervisor position at a local discount grocery store. A front desk receptionist at a chain dental clinic. An application to drive your own car for a food delivery service. "We've done all the heavy legwork for you," my father said, his voice dripping with unbearable condescension. "You are drifting aimlessly, Arthur. You have 0 assets to your name. You have no relationships of any substance. This family strongly believes in upward mobility and leaving a legacy. Right now, your absolute lack of effort is actively dragging the family name down into the mud." I stared blankly at the grocery store application resting on my knees. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of this performance was almost poetic in its cruelty. Julian uncrossed his arms and took a step forward, fully embracing his manufactured role as the ultimate savior. "Look, Arthur. I know it's incredibly tough for you to look around and realize just how far behind you are in life. So, I'm willing to offer you a very real lifeline tonight. I am now the official CEO of Rivian Dynamics. I have the unilateral authority to hire a personal assistant. It's an entry-level position, obviously. You'll manage my daily calendar, pick up my dry cleaning, fetch my coffee, and organize my files. The starting salary is $30,000 a year. It's minimum wage, but it will finally give you the structure and discipline you so desperately lack." A loud, collective murmur of absolute awe swept through the gathered relatives. "Julian, you are far too generous," Aunt Beatrice gasped, clutching her pearls in genuine shock. "Hiring your own brother when he has absolutely 0 corporate qualifications. What a saint you are." "It's family, Aunt Beatrice," Julian said humbly, pressing a perfectly manicured hand to his chest, playing the crowd perfectly. "We have a moral obligation to take care of our own, even the ones who stubbornly refuse to take care of themselves." I slowly looked up from the humiliating folder on my lap. I looked dead in the eyes of my brilliant, devastatingly arrogant brother. He truly, deeply believed he was throwing a life preserver to a drowning, pathetic man. He was completely, blissfully unaware that he was standing ankle-deep in a puddle while I personally owned and controlled the entire ocean. "I really appreciate the offer, Julian," I said, keeping my voice incredibly soft and hesitant, injecting just enough fake emotion and defeated body language to make it utterly believable to them. I just don't know what to say right now." "Say yes," my mother demanded sharply, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Say thank you to your brother, and then go home, clean yourself up, and figure out how to dress like a respectable professional, so you don't embarrass him in front of his board on Monday morning." I slowly closed the heavy manila folder, clutching it with both hands. "I'll think about it," my father scoffed loudly in utter disgust, throwing his hands up in the air. "Think about it? You have absolutely nothing to think about. You take the damn job Julian is generously offering, or you are officially cut off from this family completely. We will not invite you back. We are entirely done enabling a loser." The terrible word hung thickly in the air. Loser. I let the heavy, suffocating silence stretch for a long, agonizing moment, allowing them to bask in their perceived victory. "I need some air," I finally said, standing up slowly. I didn't wait for a single response. I turned my back on them and walked out of the living room, physically feeling the intense burn of a dozen highly judgmental stares tracking my every move. I walked down the long, dimly lit, heavily carpeted hallway toward the back of the massive house, desperately needing a moment of absolute silence to mentally process the sheer, unbridled arrogance I had just witnessed. As I neared my father's old mahogany-paneled library, I heard a voice. It was hushed, frantic, and laced with pure panic. I instantly stopped dead in my tracks. The heavy oak door of the library was slightly ajar, leaving a crack of light spilling into the dark hallway. I pressed my back flat against the cold wall, holding my breath, straining to listen. It was Chloe, Julian's beautiful, heavily manicured, seemingly flawless wife. She was aggressively pacing back and forth across the hardwood floor, holding her cell phone so tightly against her ear her knuckles were white. "I don't care what time it is, Marcus. You need to fix the damn spreadsheets right now," Chloe hissed furiously into the receiver. "Nexus Horizon is sending their elite compliance team tomorrow morning before the final meeting. If they look closely at the Q3 vendor payouts, they are going to see the massive discrepancies. They are going to find the phantom accounts." My blood went instantly, shockingly ice cold. Phantom accounts. Listen to me very carefully. Chloe's voice grew increasingly desperate, bordering on hysteria. "I funneled over $2.4 million into offshore shell companies over the last 18 months. Julian is a complete, arrogant idiot. He just blindly signs whatever documents I put in front of him. He actually thinks our profit margins are up because of his brilliant leadership. He doesn't know the company is bleeding out from the inside." I seamlessly pulled my phone out of my pocket, unlocked it, and silently hit the record button. "Just shift the massive liabilities to the dormant subsidiaries," she snapped, her voice trembling with rage. "If Nexus Horizon signs this contract tomorrow, they'll inject $50 million of capital into Rivian Dynamics upfront. I can easily cover the stolen funds, balance the books before the end of the fiscal year, and no one will ever know what I did. But if they find the massive hole tomorrow morning, Julian goes straight to federal prison for corporate fraud, and I lose the house, the cars, everything. Just fix it." She hung up the phone abruptly, breathing heavily, the sound of her expensive heels clicking frantically against the floorboards. I stood in the deep shadows of the hallway, my mind racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour, processing the unbelievable data I had just captured. Julian wasn't a ruthless business genius. He was a blindly useful idiot, a highly expendable pawn. His own wife was aggressively embezzling millions of dollars, meticulously setting him up to take the ultimate, devastating fall for massive corporate fraud. And they were actively trying to use my company, Nexus Horizon, my billions, to bail their sinking ship out of the water. The anger that suddenly flared in my chest wasn't hot. It was absolute zero. It was crystalline and perfectly focused. They thought they could humiliate me, belittle me, and treat me like garbage in my childhood home, while simultaneously, actively trying to defraud my empire out of millions of dollars. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, the recording safely secured in the cloud, and stepped quietly away from the library door. I walked silently toward the kitchen to grab a glass of water, my mind calculating 1,000 different variables, plotting my exact next move. The game had just fundamentally changed. This was no longer just about wounded family pride or petty sibling rivalry. This was outright corporate warfare. But the Dark Knight had one more devastating dagger waiting perfectly positioned for my back. As I stood alone in the massive kitchen, leaning heavily against the cold marble island counter, staring blankly out the frost-covered window at the furiously falling snow, I heard a sound. It was the soft, rhythmic tapping of a wooden cane against the tile floor. I turned my head to see Grandma Rose slowly shuffling into the kitchen. She was 82 years old, physically frail, but her sharp eyes were still as bright and piercing as broken glass. Out of everyone in this sprawling, toxic family tree, she was the absolute only person who had ever looked at me with anything resembling genuine respect or love. "You handled that despicable firing squad well, Arthur," she rasped, her voice thick with age as she pulled out a wooden stool and sat down with a heavy, pained sigh. "I have a lot of practice being their target, Grandma," I replied softly, taking a sip of the cold tap water. She looked at me for a long, intense time, There was a deep, sorrowful regret etched into the deep lines of her face. "They are fools," she whispered, shaking her head. "Loud, arrogant, blind fools. But your mother, Eleanor, is much worse than a fool. She is incredibly dangerous." I frowned, setting my glass down on the marble with a soft clink. "What do you mean by that?" Grandma Rose glanced nervously toward the hallway to make absolutely sure we were alone. "When you were sitting on that stool in the living room, your mother had a bag of papers. Did you happen to see the thick yellow envelope? The one that accidentally slipped out, and she snatched it back incredibly quickly, hiding it behind the pillow." I instantly recalled the specific moment. Yes, there was a thick, legal-sized yellow envelope she had hidden with frantic speed. I saw it. I didn't see what was written on the front of it. Rose took a long, shaking breath, bracing herself. It was labeled Estate Review. "Your grandfather, my late husband, didn't leave everything to your father when he passed. He saw exactly how they treated you. He saw that you had a brilliant, unique mind. Before he died 15 years ago, he established a massive, irrevocable trust. It included prime real estate, massive liquid assets, and heavy stock portfolios. Half of it was legally designated for Julian. The other half, the significantly larger half, was explicitly meant for you." The entire kitchen seemed to violently tilt on its axis. My breath caught in my throat. "What? You were meant to automatically inherit millions of dollars the moment you turned 21, she said, hot tears welling in her old eyes. But Eleanor couldn't stand the thought of it. She knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that if you had your own money, you would leave this house and never look back. You wouldn't be their convenient family punching bag anymore. And more importantly, she desperately needed all of that wealth to fund Julian's endless failed startups, to buy his social influence, to build his artificial empire. How? My voice was barely a rough whisper. How did she physically take it? An irrevocable trust is legally binding. It's ironclad. She aggressively paid off your Uncle Henry, Rose confessed, the overwhelming shame heavy and thick in her voice. Henry was the named legal executor of the estate. Eleanor bribed him with a massive cut of the money to falsify the release documents and forge signatures. They drained your trust entirely. They stole your inheritance, Arthur. They completely stole your future to buy Julian's present. I gripped the edge of the marble counter so incredibly hard my knuckles turned stark white. My own mother, my own flesh and blood uncle. They hadn't just neglected me emotionally. They hadn't just favored my brother. They had actively, criminally robbed me blind. Every single insult they ever hurled about me being broke, every sneer about my cheap clothes, every condescending lecture about my lack of ambition. They said all of it while standing victoriously on a massive mountain of my stolen money. "Why didn't you tell me this years ago?" I asked, my voice trembling with a rage so pure, so absolute, it felt like icy clarity. "I had no physical proof," she wept softly, covering her face. "And I was terrified of what Eleanor would do to me. But I can't stay quiet for another second. Not after watching them hand you grocery store applications tonight. You need to get a ruthless lawyer, Arthur. You need to sue them. You need to fight them for every penny." I walked over, leaned down, and gently kissed the top of my grandmother's trembling head. "I don't need a lawyer, Grandma. I am going to handle this myself." I left the house shortly after that conversation. I didn't say goodbye to a single soul in the living room. I drove back to my apartment through the blinding, howling snowstorm, the heavy silence of the car filled only by the rhythmic hum of the heater and the furious racing of my thoughts. My mind was a steel trap snapping firmly shut. At exactly 6 a.m. the next morning, long before the sun rose, I was sitting in the underground executive suite of Nexus Horizon. The high-tech biometric security system hummed quietly in the background. My chief operating officer, Marcus, a former military intelligence officer who was fiercely loyal to me, walked into the massive glass-walled office holding a highly encrypted digital tablet. "Morning, Arthur," Marcus said, his face deadpan and grim. "I ran the deep-dive forensic audit on Rivian Dynamics exactly like you asked at 2 a.m. And?" I asked, staring blankly out at the massive digital monitors displaying real-time global market data. "It's an absolute bloodbath," Marcus confirmed, sliding the heavy tablet across the sleek desk. "Your sister-in-law, Chloe, is running a highly sophisticated embezzlement ring. She's cooked the corporate books beyond all recognition. Rivian Dynamics is virtually bankrupt. If Julian signs the partnership agreement with us today, it officially constitutes federal wire fraud and massive corporate sabotage. We are talking 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary for both of them." I looked down at the hard data glowing on the screen. The phantom accounts, the offshore transfers to the Cayman Islands. I had it all. Every single piece of the puzzle. "Cancel the legal team's prep meeting," I ordered, my voice dead calm. "Let the meeting proceed exactly as scheduled. I want the entire Rivian Dynamics executive team, along with my arrogant family, in our main boardroom." Marcus smiled, a dangerous, highly knowing smile. "Understood, boss. What's the play here?" We let them walk right through the front door, feeling like kings. At exactly 1:45 p.m. that afternoon, I was standing quietly behind the wooden counter of my dusty, cluttered antique watch shop. I was wearing a heavily stained canvas apron over a crisp, $10,000 custom-tailored suit, completely hidden underneath. The brass bell above the front door chimed aggressively. In walked my family, bringing the freezing cold air with them. Julian, wearing a ridiculous power suit and a smug grin. Chloe, looking exactly like a highly nervous supermodel clutching a designer leather briefcase. My mother and father, looking around the small, cramped shop with looks of absolute, unshielded disgust. "Good Lord, Arthur, it smells terribly of machine oil and poverty in here," Eleanor complained loudly, dramatically covering her nose with a cashmere-gloved hand. Julian aggressively checked his gold Rolex, tapping his foot impatiently. "Listen to me very closely, Arthur. The senior executives from Nexus Horizon are supposed to meet us here in exactly 10 minutes. I don't know why that eccentric, reclusive billionaire wanted to meet in this absolute dump of a neighborhood, but you need to stay entirely out of the way. Do not speak to anyone. Do not touch anything. Just stand quietly in the back corner and let me handle the adults." I looked calmly at Julian. I looked at Chloe, who was visibly sweating through her expensive foundation makeup. I looked at my mother, who had heartlessly stolen my entire inheritance to buy the very suit Julian was currently wearing. I reached up to my neck and slowly, deliberately untied the thick knot of my stained canvas apron. I let it drop heavily to the dusty wooden floor, revealing the immaculate, breathtakingly expensive custom-tailored charcoal suit underneath. The casual, undeniable elegance of immense, terrifying wealth. Julian frowned, deep confusion wrinkling his forehead. "What are you doing? Why are you dressed like that?" I didn't answer him. I turned my back to them in complete silence and walked purposefully toward the massive, solid oak bookshelf at the very back of the shop. "Arthur, stop walking away when I am talking to you," my father barked angrily. I ignored him completely. I placed my right hand flat against the spine of a specific, worn leather-bound book on the middle shelf. A hidden, state-of-the-art biometric scanner instantly scanned my palm print. A soft, futuristic electronic chime echoed clearly through the dusty, silent shop. "Access granted. Welcome, founder." The entire massive bookshelf hissed, unlocking with the heavy, undeniable thud of bank vault gears. Slowly, the wall split completely in two, sliding open to reveal a blindingly bright, hyper-modern glass corridor lined with highly armed security personnel in sharp black suits. At the very end of the long corridor was the Nexus Horizon executive boardroom, overlooking the breathtaking city skyline. The silence in the watch shop was so absolute, so suffocating you could hear a pin drop. I turned slowly back to look at my family. Their jaws were completely unhinged. Their eyes were wide with a level of terror and shock they couldn't even begin to process yet. "Right this way, Julian," I said, my voice echoing with a chilling, absolute authority. "The billionaire is ready to see you now. But that is only the beginning of the end." I thought the worst was over. I was so incredibly wrong. The incredibly heavy, military-grade biometric vault door hissed open with a deeply satisfying, mechanical rush of pressurized air, sliding seamlessly and silently into the reinforced brick wall of my supposedly dusty antique watch shop. A wave of crisp, perfectly climate-controlled air washed over us instantly, entirely replacing the familiar, comforting smell of old machine oil and aged wood with the faint, expensive electric scent of ozone and polished steel. The massive hidden corridor that stretched out endlessly before my family was an absolute masterpiece of modern corporate architecture. The sprawling floors were poured concrete, meticulously polished to a flawless mirror shine that reflected the harsh reality of what was happening. The towering walls on either side were constructed entirely of advanced smart glass, currently displaying flowing, glowing digital streams of Nexus Horizons global market shares, live international real estate holdings, and encrypted communication nodes. Standing at absolute, rigid attention along the length of the futuristic corridor were 4 highly trained security personnel. They were dressed in immaculate, custom-tailored black suits, their transparent earpieces glowing faintly in the cool, blue-tinted overhead lighting. I stood there in my $10,000 custom-tailored charcoal suit, feeling the sheer weight and power of the fabric, while the heavily stained canvas apron rested completely forgotten on the dusty floorboards behind me. I turned my head slowly and looked at the 4 people who had spent my entire 32 years of life treating me like an embarrassing, unfortunate stain on their pristine, carefully curated family legacy. Their collective, immediate reaction was a fascinating, real-time masterclass in profound psychological denial. It is a truly remarkable thing to watch the human brain aggressively and desperately refuse to process physical reality when that specific reality completely shatters its core, foundational belief system. Julian, always the golden child, always the loudest voice in the room, was the very first to break the suffocating, heavy silence. He let out a harsh, nervous, highly unnatural bark of laughter that echoed awkwardly down the silent, gleaming corridor. He aggressively adjusted the lapels of his expensive midnight blue Italian suit, attempting to physically puff himself up, desperately trying to regain a sense of absolute control over a situation he clearly did not understand in the slightest. "Arthur, what in the absolute world did you just do?" Julian demanded, his voice pitching slightly higher and thinner than its usual booming register. "Did you seriously hack into their corporate security system? Are you completely insane? You are going to get every single one of us arrested for industrial espionage before the meeting even starts. Close that massive door right now before their armed security team notices we breached the perimeter." He actually genuinely believed I had illegally breached a $1.5 billion tech company's highly secure mainframe from a wooden bookshelf in a rundown historic district. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance required to maintain that level of aggressive ignorance was staggering to witness. My father, Charles, quickly stepped forward, his face flushed with sudden, hot anger. He pointed a trembling, highly authoritative finger directly at the center of my chest. "Arthur, I am warning you, this is absolutely not one of your stupid little garage games. This is the biggest, most important day of your brother's entire professional career. You are actively, maliciously jeopardizing a massive corporate promotion and a life-changing salary increase for Julian. Step aside this very second and let me explain to these security guards that you are just the mentally unstable landlord of this decrepit building and that we have a legitimate appointment." My mother, Eleanor, clutched her expensive, imported designer leather handbag so incredibly tightly against her chest that her knuckles were completely white and bloodless. She looked down the futuristic, glowing corridor, her eyes widening as she took in the heavily armed guards, and then she looked furiously back at me. Her sharp eyes darted rapidly back and forth, frantically searching the immediate area for any logical, comforting explanation that allowed her to keep me neatly and permanently confined in the pathetic, helpless box she had built for me since childhood. "Arthur, stop this childish, embarrassing nonsense right now," Eleanor hissed, her voice dripping with absolute venom and panic. "You are deeply embarrassing this entire family in front of important people. Go back to your dirty little workbench, put your apron back on, and let the real, educated adults handle the high-level corporate world. You don't even know what the word equity means, let alone how to conduct yourself in a place like this. I didn't argue with a single one of them. I didn't raise my voice to defend my honor. I didn't try to desperately explain myself the way I used to when I was a broken 12-year-old boy seeking their fleeting approval. I simply gave them a cold, completely empty, terrifyingly calm smile. I turned my back to them, entirely dismissing their presence, and began walking with slow, deliberate purpose down the long, glowing corridor. The sharp, authoritative sound of my expensive leather shoes striking the polished concrete echoed loudly, a rhythmic drumbeat marching toward their inevitable destruction. The 4 security guards immediately snapped to even stricter attention as I passed them, subtly bowing their heads in a highly synchronized display of absolute, unquestioning respect and loyalty. "Good afternoon, sir. The boardroom is prepared," the lead guard stated firmly, his deep voice echoing clearly in the hallway for everyone to hear. Behind me, I heard the hesitant, shuffling, nervous footsteps of my family following along. They had absolutely no other choice but to follow me. The heavy, military-grade vault door had silently glided shut behind them the moment they crossed the threshold, seamlessly and permanently locking them inside my powerful, unshakable world. "See," Julian whispered loudly and frantically to our parents, his heavy footsteps hurrying to catch up to my measured pace. "The guards clearly think Arthur is part of the late-night maintenance staff or something. They probably recognize his face from cleaning the floors and emptying the trash cans around here. Just keep your heads down, act extremely confident, and follow my lead. I am the CEO of Rivian Dynamics. I will take absolute control of this highly unusual situation the exact second we see the Nexus Horizon executives." Chloe, Julian's beautiful, heavily manicured wife, was the absolute only person in the group who remained completely, terrifyingly silent. While my parents and my deeply arrogant brother were busy frantically wrapping themselves in incredibly thick layers of comforting denial, Chloe was a seasoned corporate embezzler. She was a predator. She knew exactly how to read a room. She knew exactly how to spot raw, undeniable power. And as she watched the armed, elite guards bow their heads in genuine respect to the man they all thought was a broke, pathetic watchmaker, I could practically hear her rapid, panicked heartbeat echoing off the smart glass walls. She was sweating profusely through her expensive foundation, her wide eyes darting desperately toward the sealed exit we had just left behind. We finally reached the very end of the long corridor. The massive, double-frosted glass doors of the main executive boardroom automatically parted for me, sliding silently into the walls. The boardroom was absolutely breathtaking. It was an architectural marvel suspended high over the bustling city, featuring massive floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows that offered a commanding, godlike, unobstructed view of the entire snow-covered skyline. A massive, custom-built conference table carved entirely from a single, flawless slab of dark black walnut dominated the center of the expansive room. Plush, high-backed ergonomic leather chairs lined the table. Standing patiently by the massive windows, looking out at the falling snow, were 2 men. The first was Marcus, my highly trusted chief operating officer, holding his heavily encrypted digital tablet and wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit. The second man was Mr. Sterling, a senior, highly respected member of my board of directors. Sterling was in his late 60s, sporting perfectly tailored silver hair, an expensive bespoke suit, and an unmistakable aura of old, deeply established wealth and power. He was the intimidating public face I often utilized for high-level, delicate corporate negotiations when I did not want to reveal my own identity to greedy partners. Julian's eyes immediately locked onto Mr. Sterling, instantly recognizing the aura of wealth. The sheer desperation in my brother's tense posture was genuinely pathetic to witness. He practically shoved me out of his way, aggressively sprinting forward with his right hand extended far out in front of him, flashing his absolute brightest, most artificial, focus group-tested corporate smile. "Mr. Founder," Julian boomed confidently, completely and utterly ignoring the presence of Marcus and myself. "I am Julian Hart, the newly appointed Chief Executive Officer of Rivian Dynamics. It is an absolute profound honor to finally meet you in person today. Let me assure you right now, bringing our dynamic firm into your incredible, forward-thinking organization will definitively be the greatest, most lucrative business decision you have ever made in your entire career. Mr. Sterling slowly, deliberately lowered his expensive reading glasses, staring down his nose at Julian's eagerly outstretched hand as if Julian were aggressively offering him a dead, diseased rat. Sterling didn't move a single solitary muscle to shake the hand. He simply stood there, perfectly still, and let the incredibly awkward, deeply humiliating silence stretch on for 10 excruciating, agonizing seconds. Julian's bright plastic smile began to violently tremble at the corners. He slowly, awkwardly lowered his outstretched hand, coughing nervously into his fist to desperately cover the overwhelming, suffocating embarrassment settling over the room. "I am most certainly not the founder of this company, Mr. Hart," Sterling said, his voice deep, rich, and completely, utterly devoid of any human warmth. "I am simply a senior board member. And quite frankly, your aggressive, deeply embarrassing lack of basic situational awareness is highly concerning for a man claiming to hold a chief executive title." My parents gasped quietly in unison behind me. Eleanor immediately stepped forward, shifting into overdrive to run desperate damage control for her precious golden child. "Oh, please forgive my son, sir. He is just so incredibly passionate and eager about this massive, historic partnership. We are a very highly educated, deeply successful family." Julian's massive new salary and his recent high-profile promotion speak entirely for themselves. "We are fully prepared to significantly elevate your company's real estate holdings and overall market share." Marcus, standing silently near the massive digital display board, let out a short, sharp, completely undisguised snort of pure amusement. Julian, absolutely desperate to regain his rapidly crumbling footing, turned around to face me. He still aggressively, pathologically clung to the comfortable, familiar delusion that I was a worthless servant completely beneath him. He snapped his fingers aggressively, directly in my face, treating me exactly like a hired waiter at a cheap restaurant. "Arthur, don't just stand there staring like a useless, brainless idiot," Julian hissed through tightly gritted teeth, his face turning red. "Go over to the side beverage bar and fetch Mr. Sterling a fresh black coffee. And get me a cold sparkling water with lime. Try your absolute hardest to make yourself useful for once in your miserable, pathetic life." I didn't move an inch. I didn't blink. I simply looked calmly at Julian's snapping fingers, hovering just inches from my face. The massive, inescapable trap of their own boundless, suffocating arrogance had been set perfectly, and they had walked right into the very center of it, completely blind, utterly convinced of their own undeniable genetic superiority. They were standing in the absolute heart of my global empire, surrounded entirely by my fiercely loyal executives, standing on concrete floors that I personally owned, and they were still boldly ordering me to fetch their drinks. It was finally time to spring the trap. It was time to burn their deeply artificial, highly toxic world entirely to the ground. I slowly, deliberately reached up and adjusted the crisp cuffs of my bespoke suit, feeling the cool metal of my custom cufflinks. I walked calmly and purposefully past Julian, deliberately brushing his tense shoulder aside with a physical force that made him stumble slightly. I headed straight toward the absolute head of the massive, dark black walnut conference table. The solitary chair positioned at the head of the table was a high-backed, deeply imposing piece of modern, ergonomic leather furniture. It was the absolute, undeniable seat of ultimate corporate power in this building. My mother's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated, blinding horror as she watched my trajectory. She genuinely, truly believed I was having a severe, very public mental breakdown. "Arthur," Eleanor whisper shouted, frantically waving her manicured hands in the air to grab my attention. "Get away from that executive chair right this instant. Have you completely lost your fragile mind? The real founder of this company is going to walk through those glass doors any second now. If you ruin this massive opportunity for Julian because of your petty jealousy, I swear to God above, I will have you completely, permanently removed from the family trust I entirely ignored her empty, pathetic, deeply ironic threats about a family trust she had already criminally stolen and drained from me over 15 years ago. I reached out, pulled the heavy, luxurious leather chair out from the table, and sat down. The exact moment my physical weight settled firmly into the leather chair, the entire integrated system of the boardroom reacted to my presence. The ambient, soft lighting instantly shifted to a highly focused, professional, bright white illumination. The massive smart glass windows automatically tinted to a sleek charcoal gray to reduce the harsh, blinding glare of the afternoon winter sun reflecting off the snow. And the highly advanced, proprietary artificial intelligence system that meticulously managed the building's core security functions spoke flawlessly through the invisible surround sound speakers embedded in the ceiling. Good afternoon, Arthur. Primary biometrics confirmed. Voice print authenticated. All global corporate systems are fully synced. The boardroom is now officially locked in executive session. The crisp, automated female voice echoed perfectly in the absolute, deathly, suffocating silence of the massive room. My father's jaw literally dropped completely open. He took a staggering, uncoordinated step backward, bumping his shoulder heavily into the cold glass wall behind him, his eyes wide with a terror he had never experienced. Julian froze completely solid, like a man suddenly encased in ice. His perfectly styled hair somehow seemed to lose its arrogant bounce. His rigid, highly confident corporate posture violently crumbled, his broad shoulders slumping heavily as his brain aggressively struggled to process the audio input he had just heard. He looked wildly at the empty air, then at the glowing digital monitors displaying my name, and finally, his gaze slowly, painfully, agonizingly dragged over to me sitting comfortably at the head of the table. Mr. Sterling stepped forward from the windows, buttoning his expensive suit jacket with smooth, highly practiced elegance. He looked directly with utter disdain at my trembling, terrified family. Mr. Charles Hart, Mrs. Eleanor Hart, and Julian. Sterling began, his voice ringing with absolute, undeniable, crushing authority. Allow me to formally, officially introduce the visionary founder, the sole proprietary owner, and the chief executive officer of Nexus Horizon. Your son and your younger brother, Mr. Arthur Hart. If I could have somehow magically bottled the precise, vivid look of pure, unadulterated devastation and reality-shattering horror that washed completely over Julian's pale face in that exact second, I would have kept it displayed on my desk as a permanent paperweight. No, Julian whispered, shaking his head frantically side to side. His voice was incredibly small, thin, sounding exactly like a highly frightened, lost child. No, this is a joke. This is some kind of elaborate, deeply sick, extremely expensive prank. You guys hired professional actors to mess with me. Arthur fixes broken vintage watches in a filthy garage. He's a total college dropout. He literally applied to work as a cashier at a discount grocery store last night. I literally saw the printed application in his hands. You saw the application that you aggressively printed for me? I corrected him, my voice perfectly calm, incredibly smooth, and dangerously, terrifyingly soft. You saw exactly what you desperately, pathetically wanted to see, Julian. You always have. You only see a world where you are the absolute center. Eleanor heavily pressed both of her shaking hands against her mouth, taking deep, ragged, gasping breaths as if the oxygen had been entirely sucked out of the expansive room by a vacuum. Arthur, is this real? Do you actually own all of this? Is this your company? I own the physical skyscraper you are currently standing inside, I stated clearly, leaning comfortably back into the ergonomic leather chair, slowly steepling my fingers together. I own the proprietary, highly classified software that Rivian Dynamics is currently begging on their knees to lease. I firmly own the global patents. I painstakingly built a $1.5 billion tech empire from the ground up while you were busy cashing out my stolen college fund to pay for Julian's expensive fraternity dues and luxury vacations. I built an undeniable empire in the dark while you were busy openly mocking my cheap winter coats and laughing cruelly at my worn-out boots at every single family Thanksgiving dinner for a decade. Charles stepped forward shakily, his face completely pale and drained of all blood, pointing a violently shaking finger directly at me. But why hide it from us? Why let us believe you were a total, miserable failure for over 10 years? Why let us openly humiliate you in our home? Because your aggressive humiliation was my primary source of reliable data, I explained coldly, staring directly into my father's terrified eyes. If I had walked into your house and told you I was a self-made billionaire at 26 years old, you would have instantly loved me. You would have loudly praised me. You would have paraded me around your exclusive country club as your ultimate, brilliant trophy son. But it wouldn't have been real love. It would have been a highly conditional love, completely, entirely dependent on my massive bank account. I needed to know exactly who you people truly were when you fully believed I had absolutely nothing of value to offer you. And last night, sitting on that wooden stool in our living room, you gave me your final, definitive, unmistakable answer. I reached slowly across the polished walnut table and picked up the heavy, thick legal folder Marcus had meticulously prepared for this exact moment. I tossed it effortlessly down the long length of the table. It slid with a smooth, satisfying swish, coming to a dead stop directly in front of Julian. There is the finalized, legally binding partnership agreement, Julian, I said, gesturing smoothly to the folder. The precise contract that guarantees Rivian Dynamics a massive $50 million capital injection by the end of the week. The exact contract that fully secures your massive new executive salary, pays for your ridiculous white leather Porsche 911 Turbo S, and artificially inflates your fragile, pathetic ego. Julian stared down at the folder like it was a live, ticking explosive device. He slowly, hesitantly reached out with violently trembling hands and flipped it open. He clearly saw the official, embossed Nexus Horizon letterhead. He saw the massive, multi-million-dollar numbers printed in bold ink. He saw the blank signature line explicitly, specifically waiting for his name to make it all real. He looked up at me, his eyes completely filled with a sickening, desperate mix of wild hope and profound, crushing confusion. You are actually still going to sign the deal? Julian asked, his voice cracking violently, a desperate, greedy light returning to his eyes. Even after everything we said to you last night? You are really going to save my company and make me a partner? I looked deeply, unblinkingly into the eager eyes of the golden child. The deeply arrogant brother who had ruthlessly taken absolutely everything from me and still shamelessly demanded more. No, Julian, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet, absolute register that chilled the entire room. I am absolutely not going to sign it. In fact, I am going to legally, entirely, and financially destroy you. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Now, let me tell you exactly how I surgically dismantled their fake, artificial empire, dollar by stolen dollar. I didn't bother looking at Julian's devastated, crumbling face anymore. My cold, unwavering gaze shifted directly past him and locked entirely onto Chloe. She had been standing silently near the very back of the family group, desperately attempting to physically blend into the shadows of the glass walls. Her expensive designer leather briefcase was clutched fiercely to her chest like a physical, protective shield against the impending disaster. The exact millisecond I made direct, piercing eye contact with her, the remaining blood completely drained from her flawlessly made-up face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. She knew. She absolutely, fundamentally knew that I knew everything. Marcus, I said loudly, not breaking my intense eye contact with my hyperventilating sister-in-law for even a fraction of a second. Please bring up the forensic corporate audit on the main digital screen. The massive, glowing digital wall directly behind me instantly shifted. The flowing global data streams disappeared in a flash, instantly replaced by a highly detailed, deeply incriminating, undeniable series of financial spreadsheets, offshore bank routing numbers, and heavily flagged internal corporate emails. Julian slowly turned his head to look at the massive screen, his brow deeply furrowed in utter, profound confusion. What is all this? These are highly classified Rivian internal accounting documents. How in the hell did you get these, Arthur? This is highly confidential proprietary information. It ceases to be confidential when you are aggressively, desperately begging me for a $50 million financial investment, I stated coldly, my voice cutting through his ignorance. It is called standard, high-level corporate due diligence. And what my elite team of forensic accountants found, Julian, is that your beautiful, deeply supportive wife has been running a highly sophisticated, multi-million-dollar corporate embezzlement ring right under your incredibly, pathetically oblivious nose. That is an absolute lie, Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly and painfully in the pristine boardroom. She pointed a sharply manicured, trembling finger directly at me. He is entirely faking these documents to get back at us for last night. Julian, don't listen to a single word he says. He's completely insane and deeply jealous of you. I have the pristine, crystal-clear audio recording of your frantic, highly illegal phone call from my father's library last night. Chloe, I said smoothly, picking up my cell phone from the table and tapping the screen deliberately. I heard you explicitly, clearly ordering your private accountant to immediately hide the massive phantom accounts before my team arrived. I heard you directly admit to illegally funneling $2.4 million into hidden shell companies in the Cayman Islands over the last 18 months. You meticulously, carefully set up the entire corporate financial structure so that your husband's digital signature is on every single fraudulent, illegal transfer. You intentionally set him up to take the ultimate, devastating fall for federal wire fraud while you plan to walk away wealthy. Julian physically staggered backward, as if he had been brutally punched squarely in the chest by an invisible heavyweight boxer. He looked back at the massive red numbers glaring on the screen. He clearly recognized his own secure digital signature authorizing the heavily fraudulent offshore transfers. He slowly, painfully turned his head to look directly at Chloe, his entire reality fragmenting into a million sharp pieces. Chloe, Julian whispered, his voice completely broken, stripped of all its former booming arrogance. Tell me this isn't real. Please, tell me you didn't actually do this to me. The flawless mask of the perfect, deeply loving, highly supportive corporate wife completely shattered into dust. Chloe instantly realized she was entirely, hopelessly cornered by undeniable, heavily documented legal proof that would hold up in any federal court. She didn't cry. She didn't offer a single apology. She viciously, immediately turned on him like a rabid, cornered animal fighting for survival. You are such a pathetic, unbelievably gullible idiot, Julian, Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs, her face twisting into something incredibly ugly and hateful. You actually genuinely thought you earned that CEO title because of your talent? You thought you were a brilliant business genius? You were absolutely nothing but a convenient, highly useful, incredibly stupid signature to me. You spent all day yesterday picking out custom white leather swatches for your stupid Porsche, while I was actually running the entire financial division of the company and keeping us afloat. I am officially filing for a vicious, highly public divorce the exact second I leave this building. I have already retained the most ruthless divorce lawyer in the state. I am taking the massive house, I am taking the remaining untouched bank accounts, and I will demand full, sole custody of the assets and the expensive purebred dogs we just bought. You are going to rot in a federal prison cell, Julian, and I am going to walk away completely, utterly clean. Julian's knees finally buckled. He collapsed heavily into one of the expensive leather boardroom chairs, burying his face deep in his shaking hands, completely and utterly destroyed. The untouchable golden child was entirely broken, brutally betrayed and financially ruined by the very woman he used to proudly parade around to mock my single status. Then, I slowly turned my cold attention to my mother. Eleanor was shaking violently, her whole body trembling as thick, dark tears completely ruined her expensive, professionally applied makeup. And now, Eleanor, I said, permanently dropping the sacred title of mother forever. Let's finally talk about the thick yellow envelope you hid behind the pillow. Let's talk about the official, legally binding estate review. Eleanor let out a sharp, horrifying, animalistic gasp, desperately gripping Charles's arm for physical support to keep from collapsing. Arthur, please. I beg you. Don't do this. Please, we are your family. You aggressively forfeited the right to use that word 15 long years ago. I fired back, my voice echoing like a cracking whip in the silent room. I had a very long, very enlightening talk with Grandma Rose last night. I know exactly what you and Uncle Henry did in the dark. I know that Grandpa left a massive, irrevocable trust entirely in my name. I know you brutally, illegally bribed the executor of the estate to forge the official release documents. You stole my inheritance. You stole my college fund. You stole millions of dollars in prime real estate and liquid assets that legally, rightfully belonged to me, just so you could recklessly fund Julian's pathetic, endlessly failing vanity projects. Charles looked at his sobbing wife in sheer, unadulterated horror. Eleanor, what in God's name is he talking about? You looked me in the eye and told me the trust was entirely lost in the stock market crash. She lied directly to your face, Charles, I said coldly, just like she lied to me every single day of my life. But unlike you, I don't just sit passively in a leather chair and blindly accept the lies I am fed. My corporate legal team has already officially retained the most aggressive, relentless estate litigation lawyer in the entire state. The massive, unavoidable lawsuit for criminal fraud, grand larceny, and severe breach of fiduciary duty was officially filed in federal court at exactly 8 a.m. this morning. Uncle Henry is already being formally questioned by the federal authorities as we speak. You are going to lose this massive colonial house. You are going to lose your comfortable, padded retirement accounts. You are going to lose absolutely everything you value. Eleanor finally collapsed completely to her knees on the polished concrete floor, sobbing hysterically, loudly begging for a mercy she had never once shown me in 32 years of my existence. Charles stood frozen over her, his entire false, comfortable reality completely, permanently shattered, looking suddenly like an incredibly old, incredibly tired, broken man. I stood up slowly from the leather executive chair, calmly adjusting the lapels of my suit jacket. I looked down one final time at the pathetic, broken, weeping remnants of my highly toxic family. Marcus, I said calmly, firmly turning my back on them and facing the sweeping city skyline. Have building security firmly escort these unauthorized individuals off my private property immediately. If they ever attempt to step foot in this building, or near my watch shop again, have them aggressively, physically arrested for criminal trespassing. As the elite security guards stepped forward, firmly grabbing their arms and physically dragging them toward the waiting elevator, their desperate screams, sobbing pleas, and pathetic, belated apologies echoed wildly down the glass corridor, fading slowly into absolute, beautiful, highly satisfying silence. The chaotic, suffocating dust of that explosive afternoon didn't settle overnight, but when it finally, completely cleared a few months later, the landscape of my entire life was permanently, beautifully altered. The severe legal and financial consequences for my family were absolute, inescapable, and devastating. The board of directors at Rivian Dynamics immediately, unceremoniously fired Julian the exact moment my highly paid legal team sent over the unredacted forensic audit proving the massive corporate fraud taking place under his supposed leadership. Without the lucrative Nexus Horizon partnership to save them, the company completely folded and filed for aggressive bankruptcy. Julian, facing intense, mounting pressure from federal authorities and the SEC, was forced to aggressively sell the custom white leather Porsche 911 Turbo S before it was even delivered to the dealership, just to afford the massive, eye-watering retainer required for a high-powered criminal defense lawyer. Chloe, true to her vicious nature, followed through on her screaming threat. She immediately filed for a brutal, highly publicized, incredibly messy divorce. She aggressively fought for full legal custody of their remaining hidden assets and maliciously dragged Julian's name through the mud in open court, painting him as the mastermind. But my legal team made absolutely sure the federal investigators had all the unredacted digital documents and the audio recordings. Chloe didn't walk away clean like she planned. She is currently sitting in a holding cell, awaiting a high-profile trial for federal embezzlement and wire fraud, facing serious prison time. As for Charles and Eleanor, the massive, highly publicized lawsuit regarding my stolen inheritance completely and utterly ruined them, both financially and socially. When the members of their elite, highly judgmental country club learned through the news that they had criminally robbed their own son to fund their lavish lifestyle, they became instant, permanent social pariahs. They were entirely excommunicated from their wealthy circles. Facing mounting legal bills and a massive restitution order, they were forced to rapidly sell the massive colonial estate at a steep loss just to settle the intense legal penalties and repay the stolen trust funds with heavy, compounding interest. They currently live in a small, cramped, heavily rented two-bedroom apartment on the far industrial outskirts of the city. Sadly, Grandma Rose passed away peacefully in her sleep about 4 months after the dramatic confrontation in the boardroom. She was very old, incredibly tired, and I honestly think she finally allowed herself to let go because she knew I was permanently safe, and the ugly, buried truth was finally out in the bright light of day. I attended her funeral. It was a bitterly cold, heavily rainy Tuesday morning. I stood completely apart from the rest of the surviving, disgraced family, flanked closely and securely by my private security team to prevent any unwanted interactions. The tension in the quiet graveyard was incredibly thick, heavy with unspoken regrets. After the heavy wooden casket was slowly lowered into the wet ground, Charles slowly, hesitantly approached me, standing in the freezing, pouring rain without an umbrella, looking completely drenched and defeated. He looked deeply broken, clutching a worn, tightly plastic-wrapped package to his chest. "Arthur?" Charles said, his voice incredibly weak, raspy, and trembling with cold and sorrow. He slowly held out the wrapped package toward me. I found these when we were packing up the big house to sell it. They are your original software blueprints. The ones Eleanor threw aggressively in the trash when you were 12 years old. I quietly dug them out of the garbage later that night when she was asleep. I kept them hidden in my desk drawer all these years. I just deeply wanted you to have them back. I looked down at the wrinkled, ancient, water-stained papers visible through the plastic. I looked up at the man who had passively, silently stood by while my spirit was systematically crushed and my future was stolen for decades. "Keep them?" I said softly, my voice completely devoid of any lingering anger or burning malice. It was just an empty, hollow truth. "I absolutely don't need the old blueprints anymore, Charles. I already successfully built the empire without them. And I don't need your retroactive, guilt-driven approval now. Do not ever attempt to contact me again." I turned my back firmly and walked to my waiting, armored car, officially, permanently closing the heavy book on that incredibly toxic chapter of my life forever. Establishing firm, impenetrable boundaries is absolutely not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate, necessary act of radical self-preservation. You simply cannot heal in the exact same toxic environment that repeatedly, aggressively made you sick. Today, my life is precisely what I always deeply wanted it to be. Nexus Horizon continues to aggressively dominate the global tech market, expanding our international reach and securing massive corporate contracts entirely on our own terms, completely free of any toxic influence. But despite the billions of dollars sitting in the bank, despite the endless high-stakes executive meetings and the luxurious international travel, I still spend my quiet, peaceful Saturday mornings down in the historic district. I still unlock the heavy wooden door of the dusty, quiet antique watch repair shop. I still put on the heavy, stained canvas apron, sit peacefully at the worn wooden workbench, and meticulously, carefully fix the delicate, intricate gears of broken pocket watches. It grounds me deeply. It constantly reminds me that no matter how chaotic, how incredibly loud, or how profoundly cruel the outside world becomes, there are always broken, complex systems that can be carefully, lovingly put back together if you simply have the intense patience and the quiet, undeniable brilliance to do the hard work yourself in the shadows. I am no longer a helpless victim of my family's toxic, fabricated narrative. I am the sole, powerful author of my own extraordinary reality. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story today. I know it was incredibly heavy and deeply emotional, but I genuinely hope it serves as a powerful, enduring reminder that your ultimate inherent value is never, ever determined by the deeply flawed, highly toxic people who actively, aggressively refuse to see your true worth. Sometimes, the most incredible, satisfying revenge you can possibly achieve is simply walking away entirely and building a beautiful, massively successful life completely without them. Have you ever faced something incredibly similar with your own toxic family dynamics? Have you ever had to establish brutal, uncompromising boundaries to actively protect your own peace and secure your future? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Until next time, stay strong, stay incredibly focused, and never let anyone tell you that you are a failure. Die Hon Tan Siu Chuyen, Tong So Tu, 3770.